One of my favorite sayings of all time is by a man that goes by the name Ezra Firestone. He always says this: serve the world unselfishly and profit. And man, I really love that idea just because I like the concept of being able to build a lucrative business that gives you the life of your dreams while also doing a ton of good for the world. And those things not being mutually exclusive, which is what a lot of people think for some reason. In today's video, however, I want to go over the journey of this one guy that raised over $650 million with an M for a food saving startup. So a really great cause and a boatload of money. So let's take a look at how he did it.
I actually never stopped to think. I just knew that food's gone bad. What does that mean? Food goes bad because water evaporates out and oxygen gets in. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my God, I've seen this problem before.
Some people have a talent for connecting dots.
This is not only a business lesson, but a science lesson. That's a really simple way to explain why food goes bad.
And some dots are bigger than others. James Rogers learned that one of the main causes of global hunger isn't that we as a species aren't capable of growing enough food. It's that so much of it goes bad before it can be consumed. If he could find a way to stretch that out, he might be able to make a dent in world hunger.
Damn.
James thought that if we could slow the process of steel from oxidizing, why can't we do the same for a ripe avocado?
All set?
All set.
Very cool.
There are three numbers to look out for in this story. 2,000, the amount James spent on his home lab. 50,000, the amount the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation invested in Appeal. And $2 billion.
Wow.
The company's total valuation. For CNBC,
damn, $2 billion company.
This is founder effect. James grew up playing sports with his brothers, but he always had an interest in learning how things worked. In middle school, he was able to choose between a traditional science fair or the invention convention, and he always chose the latter.
I remember doing like an automatic fish feeder one year, huge problems, that needs.
Why does this sound exactly like a Minecraft automatic farm?
Solving, and I remember doing a never lost golf ball that would like make a noise so you could find it.
In 2014, he was accepted to
That's
Carnegie
cool.
Mellon, where he studied material science engineering and played football as an inside linebacker. And one of the earliest lessons he learned in a class on transportation was how rust forms. Oxygen reacts with iron, forming iron oxide, which over time destroys the iron.
Metallurgists had figured out this clever trick that if you incorporated certain atoms, like chromium, for example, into the steel, that when that oxygen atom came in, the chromium atom would react with it, and it would form this little chromium oxide barrier around the outside. And that barrier would sit there and it would block more oxygen from getting in. And that was the innovation of stainless steel.
After graduating
Whoa, I
in
didn't know that.
2017, James realized he needed to go to grad school. But he wasn't necessarily after a degree. He wanted a mentor.
And that was a big unlock for me because I realized that if I found a person whose interests matched mine, I could kind of go be an apprentice for that person and learn from their experience and their work. And that's what I ended up doing. I was introduced to a professor at UC Santa Barbara by the name of Ed Kramer.
James wanted to see if he could lower the...
Interesting. So here's a great argument to going to a higher level education institution like a university is for the connections, the potential network that you can build off of it. We actually talked a lot about that with one of the co-founders of Tabs, which is a really dope brand. You can check out the podcast right here. I'll link it. And he's actually a freshman in college. So it was really interesting to hear his perspective as to why he decided to go to college and why for him it was the right decision. But let's get on with this.
Price of solar power by creating a paint that could turn sunlight into energy. The problem was that the paint reacted differently each time it was applied.
So my 6.5 years of my life were spent developing techniques to watch the paint dry at a molecular level.
The title of his PhD thesis was
The Role of Solvent Additives in the Structural Order of Bulk Heterojunction Solar Cells.
Bro literally watched paint dry at a molecular level for 6.5 years. That's dedication right there.
Not exactly a New York Times bestseller.
But James also began taking business classes. If he landed on a world-changing idea, he needed to learn how to bring it to life. Every other week, James would drive the 6 hours from Santa Barbara to Lawrence Berkeley National Labs to use their specialized equipment. And it was on one of these long drives, where farmland stretched as far as the eye could see, that he landed on the idea that would eventually change his life.
It was one of these drives where I was listening to how we're going to feed 10 billion people, and I just looked around, and basically as far as I could see in every direction was food. And it was that little grain of sand that got in there, and I just couldn't get it out.
So he started looking to the issue of food waste and was surprised by how little progress had been made.
So what do you do after you get your PhD? Do you go into your garage and start formulating this?
I remember I had the idea. I remember thinking, why isn't someone I had the thought, like, why isn't someone doing this? Well, if someone's not already doing this, then someone's already tried it and it doesn't work. I just slowly kept looking into all the reasons I thought it wouldn't work until I couldn't come up with any more reasons it wouldn't work.
When you say what do you mean?
The idea.
Yo, this is crazy because I just piece this together in a recent video that I made titled Stop Watching Dropshipping YouTube Videos. I showed you guys Gary Tan, who is a billionaire, and one of the questions that he said helps you get started on a potential huge billion-dollar idea, right, is to think of reasons why something won't work instead of why something will work, because if there's no more reasons why something won't work, then chances are it will work, so you should just go for it. And that's crazy that this guy used that same framework to pursue this idea that now revolutionized his entire life and will potentially change the world. Like, how crazy is that?
Idea that we could use food to give food more time.
That idea, that's what I'm wondering, is like, you're in this, you're driving, you see this, you're like, wait a minute, there's a lot of hungry people, there's a lot of food. What's going on here?
I actually never stopped to think. I just knew that food's gone bad. What does that mean? What does going bad mean? The simplest answer came back. Food goes bad because water evaporates out and oxygen gets in. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my God, I've seen this problem before in my undergraduate transport class at Carnegie Mellon, and I've seen it for steel. Steel used to go bad. Oxygen would react with iron and form iron oxide, which is rust, that red stuff that flakes off, and the iron would go bad. Now granted, it was over longer periods of time than a strawberry.
Here's how a peel works. Produce is either dipped or sprayed with an edible coating that keeps oxygen out and water in, dramatically slowing the decaying process. James built a lab in his bedroom to start testing his hypothesis, using spent coffee cherries from a nearby farm. But his operation quickly outgrew the space, so in 2011, he and his brother headed to Home Depot to purchase supplies to build a proper lab in his garage.
Wow.
How much do you think you spent building out that first lab in that garage? What would you ballpark it at?
The lab part, probably, I don't know, $200 in 2x4s. And then I bought some used lab equipment off of, there's a company that does, it's like eBay for used lab equipment. Probably $1,000 worth of used lab equipment. So, a couple $1,000s to set up the first lab.
But to fully prove his concept, he needed to find some money, so he started making calls to potential investors.
Well, I started by trying to talk to investors, kind of all said, it sounds like a good idea, come back to me when you have the technology. And it was kind of like, I wouldn't need to talk to you if I had the technology. So ended up writing a grant to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation about the idea. And they thought it was interesting enough to write a $100,000 check, use that money to get started, and then with
wow,
that money, we had a little bit of momentum.
This guy is so resourceful, man. This is a great lesson for anybody watching this. I love how this guy thinks about problems and how he thinks about solutions, and ultimately the reason why this thing that he's building is a $2 billion idea is because it's a huge, massive problem, and he's trying to solve it. That's so cool.
Was the Bill and Melinda Gates seal of approval worth more than the $100,000 investment?
Hands down. Yeah, hands down. That's the whole thing in the beginning, right? I think that's the art. There's a book somewhere, I think it's called The Art of the Start. I think that's where the art is. How do you go from nothing to anything, to a teeny bit of something? That's really it. It's the fact that an organization with scientific credibility thinks it's an interesting enough idea to invest some money is absolutely worth more than the money.
From there, the money flowed.
I went to a gentleman's house. We had lunch, and at the end of the lunch, he said, "Well, this sounds great. I'd like to write you a check." And it was the first time I'd ever heard that. And I said, "Oh, that sounds great. I'll get, I'll get back to the office, garage. I'll send you the paperwork." He's like, "Oh, I don't need any paperwork. I'm just gonna write you the check now." And it was like, this guy's gonna write me a $50,000 check out of his personal checking account. I've never experienced anything like that before in my life.
James poured about
Wow.
$1 million into his work, and 4 years later had concrete evidence that his idea for a food-based coating to extend the life of produce could work. Now all he needed was a guinea pig. He was picking up some spent coffee cherries when he told the farmer about his idea.
And he said, "Oh, that's a really interesting idea. Could you do anything for my finger limes?" We're like, "What the hell's a finger lime?" And we bring some of these finger limes home with us, and we realize the reason he's asking us is because they only last about 5 days. We realized that actually this was the perfect fruit fly for our experiments because it goes bad so quickly that you can see differences between the formulations really, really rapidly. We started working furiously on these finger limes. And I remember that we developed, formula that got them from, 5 days up to 20 days. This was,
Wow.
to them, hugely exciting because
That's
they
insane.
used to have to overnight ship these things to the restaurateurs that were, using them. And now all of a sudden, instead of having to pick, pack, and ship on the same day, they could pick one day, they could treat the next day, they could ship them the next day.
But cool looking as they are, finger limes aren't nearly as popular as, say,
Yeah, I've never seen those
avocados.
before.
We started talking to grocers about what it would mean if they had an avocado that lasted twice as long and what that would mean for their business. And we learned a ton.
This is such a good sales technique because he just said we talked to these grocery stores about what it would mean if you had food that lasted like 5x longer. Instead of selling him all the technology and everything, like he sold them on the benefits, like on the result, which is so smart. Honestly, that's why I've been actually really liking sales lately, like this skill as a whole, because ultimately the way I see sales is the easiest thing to sell is something that's actually going to help somebody, right? So that's a really interesting thing I noticed.
We learned that, today they order the avocados to the store and they're not all the way ripe because if they order them all the way ripe, they're going to throw a bunch away. But then they don't sell as much when they don't order them perfectly ripe. They're a big waste category and consumers, have challenges when they bring them home.
In 2018, Appeal landed its first paying customer in a Northwest Arkansas grocery store chain called Harps. Appeal's coating is applied at packing houses, which are basically drop-off points where thousands of farmers send their produce to be packaged and shipped to a final destination.
But once we had the equipment installed with our first supplier and we were delivering the product to our grocery partner and they were seeing the results, I'll never forget those beginning texts, from the store managers saying like, "Wow, we're getting 3 extra days of ripe time on our avocado." And it's just like,
As other grocers saw how Appeal extended the shelf life of produce, they began asking about the product. Now, Appeal's numbers
That's
are
such a good name. Appeal for something like this. That's a genius name.
staggering. The company has about 400 employees and has raised over $650 million in outside investments. Its product is used by 70 grocery chains with over 22,000 stores across North America and Europe.
Are you gonna go public or?
right now the focus is just build. We've plenty of capital in the bank, and it's just let's take advantage of the opportunity that we have in front of us. So there's no plans.
What was the biggest money mistake that you made along the way, do you think?
Well, it's funny to say this out loud. I remember having lunch with the guy that wrote the first check that I told you about. I remember him asking me the question. He said, "James, if you had twice as much money, could you go twice as fast?" And I thought, well, if I had twice as much money, I could probably go more than twice as fast. Like right now, I'm being really deliberate and doing everything like one experiment and then do the next one and then the next one. I remember him saying that you need to ask yourself the question, we didn't give you the money to hold on to it. In the early days, it was, ironically, not understanding the value.
That's interesting.
Not understanding the value of actually the money was so you could go faster, not so that you could go slower. So that in the early days stands out as something that I just didn't appreciate. I'd never had a budget before.
Wow. That kind of goes with the saying, you know, you got to spend money to make money. And he realized that early on, having more money allowed him to go faster, which is always a good thing, you know, especially with an idea like this. Speed is really valuable because time is so valuable.
Do you see the complexity of building and operating the company being outside of your purview or interest area?
I think that's spot on. I'm not doing it alone today. To be very clear, the only reason that we've been successful has been because of the team that we've been able to build. You know, even from the early days, having the right people on the bus that were here to figure it out and build it from nothing, and you know, then to bring on people who'd seen the movie before, had seen that stage of the business, had led it through a certain stage of growth. And so I'm doing that now, building that team. It's the only reason that we're able to sit here and have this interview is people are running the company.
Wow. That's amazing. So inspiring, man. This was such a good video. I'm so happy that I decided to watch this with you guys as opposed to just watch it by myself, because I think when I like pause and reiterate some of the ideas that I learned, it actually helps me learn it even deeper. So yeah, again, I'm just really grateful that I even can do this and I even get to learn about this stuff with you guys and pass it down and create this ripple effect. So if you enjoyed this video, then I want you to give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more. Check out some of the resources in the description. Check out CNBC. Check out James Rogers, the founder of Appeal Sciences. Hopefully we can get him on the channel someday. I'm just going to put that out into the universe right now. But that's about it. Hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Peace.